In a high-end restaurant in Denver, an ordinary evening suddenly turned into a profound lesson on respect and patience. Guests were enjoying their meals, unaware that a quiet confrontation was about to unfold, altering the atmosphere of the place. A young waitress, who never anticipated facing such a harsh challenge, was about to learn an unforgettable lesson from a man in a gray suit, someone whose power stretched beyond the restaurant and into the hearts of many. Can the arrogance of one person be defeated with nothing but respect and integrity? The busy evening at the Royal Bistro was well underway. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over gleaming wooden tables, each set with white tablecloths and sparkling dinnerware. Waitstaff moved swiftly, balancing trays of artfully presented food, their steps light on the marble floor. Among the diners, a group of 3 women sat in the center of the room, their laughter echoing above the soft hum of conversation around them. At the head of the table sat Cynthia Jacobs, a striking woman who caught attention the moment she walked in. Not only was Cynthia wealthy, but she radiated an air of elegance. Her diamond necklace sparkled, much like the watch on her wrist, visible beneath the tailored sleeve of her blazer. With a manicured hand, she took a sip of wine, her gaze constantly scanning the room, as if evaluating whether this place met her standards. To Cynthia, everything had a hierarchy, and tonight, she sat firmly at the top. At the far end of the room, a young waitress, visibly anxious, weaved through the maze of tables. Her name was Sarah, though her name tag was hard to see beneath her dark uniform. Sarah had been working double shifts for weeks, saving every penny for her college tuition, but tonight, her exhaustion was evident in her slightly wobbly steps as she placed a tray of drinks on a table. Cynthia caught sight of her, her lips curling into a mocking smile. To Cynthia, people like Sarah were nothing more than shadows, until they made a mistake. The tension escalated when Sarah approached Cynthia's table with her meal. "Here is your order, enjoy your meal," she said softly, her voice trembling, though her politeness remained intact. Cynthia raised an eyebrow, staring at her plate. "Excuse me," Cynthia cut through the air, her voice sharp as a knife, "is this supposed to be medium rare? It looks well done. And why did it take so long? We've been waiting forever." Sarah blinked, taken aback and flustered. I apologize, I'll take it back right away." "No, don't apologize anymore," Cynthia interrupted, her friends exchanging gleeful glances, clearly enjoying the drama. "Really, it's not that hard to get an order right, is it?" Sarah's face flushed, and the room seemed to freeze for a moment, the tension thick in the air. But from across the room, a man in a simple gray suit sat quietly, observing. His expression gave nothing away, but his eyes never left the scene. The moment was far from over, and what would happen next would change everything. Sarah's hands trembled as she picked up Cynthia's plate. She nodded politely, whispering, "I'll have this corrected right away," before turning toward the kitchen. But Cynthia wasn't finished. "Unbelievable," Cynthia muttered, loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. "They're hiring anyone now, huh? How hard is it to carry a plate without looking like you're about to drop it?" Laughter erupted from her friends, and Cynthia leaned back in her chair, clearly relishing the attention. Does she think a smile and stuttering will earn her tips? Honestly, I should report her for ruining our entire evening. At the kitchen door, Sarah hesitated, her hand tightening around the plate. Her face burned, and tears began to well up, though she fought to keep them from falling. She had dealt with rude customers before, but there was something about Cynthia's deliberate cruelty that made the pain sink deeper than she expected. From his seat at the corner of the room, the man in the gray suit watched the scene unfold. His face remained cold, but his fingers gently tapped on the edge of his glass, each motion slow and deliberate, as though he were weighing every detail of what he had just witnessed. Back at Cynthia's table, the complaints continued. "How is she walking like that?" Cynthia sneered, glaring at Sarah as she passed. "She looks like she's barely holding it together. If she can't handle a job here, maybe she should find something more suitable, like baking bread." Other diners began to feel the discomfort, some whispering to their companions, others casting disapproving glances toward Cynthia's table. A couple nearby exchanged looks before shaking their heads in silent agreement. But Cynthia, oblivious, or perhaps indifferent, continued unabated. Sarah returned a few minutes later with a fresh plate of food. She placed it in front of Cynthia, trying her best to remain calm. "Here is the new dish. I've asked the chef to redo it for you. I hope it meets your expectations." Cynthia glanced at the plate dismissively and shrugged. "I suppose it's fine," she said nonchalantly, "but next time, try to get it right from the start, and for God's sake, learn some manners. You're representing this restaurant, and honestly, you're doing a terrible job." Sarah forced a smile, her voice barely audible. "Of course, ma'am, I'll do my best," she said before turning and walking away. Cynthia returned to her conversation, her smile smug. "Isn't it wonderful how people can be so incompetent and still think they deserve respect?" At that moment, the man in the gray suit stood up. Each step was deliberate, measured, as he made his way to the restaurant manager, who was standing near the bar. He approached quietly, leaned in, and said something in a low voice. The manager's eyes widened slightly. Meanwhile, Cynthia remained unaware, still chatting, blissfully ignorant that her evening was about to take an unexpected turn. But this man was no ordinary guest, and his quiet intervention was about to shake the entire room. The manager, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and a calm demeanor, nodded respectfully as the man in the gray suit spoke. It was a brief exchange, but those nearby could see the subtle shift in the manager's expression, from curiosity to something more serious. After the conversation ended, the man returned to his table, walking slowly and purposefully. Meanwhile, Cynthia had moved on to another topic, continuing to boast about her recent vacation. "The staff was amazing," she said, swirling her wine glass. "The private villas were exquisite, you can't imagine, and the service was perfect, nothing like what we've seen here tonight." Her words were emphasized with a smug smile, and her friends chuckled in agreement. Across the room, Sarah quietly refilled drink trays, her hands still shaking. She tried to avoid looking at Cynthia, focusing only on her work. She had learned to compartmentalize her emotions while on the job, but tonight, everything felt almost impossible. It wasn't until Cynthia and her friends asked for the bill that the atmosphere in the restaurant began to shift. The manager walked to their table, followed by Sarah. He carried a tray with a bottle of champagne and an envelope. Cynthia raised an eyebrow, skeptical, though her arrogance still lingered on her face. "Good evening," the manager began, his tone calm and professional, "a gift from the restaurant." Cynthia's friends gasped, one of them clapping delightedly. "How wonderful!" one of them exclaimed. Cynthia leaned back in her chair, clearly pleased. "Finally, someone recognizes the value of excellent customers," she said, casting a mocking glance at Sarah. But the manager's next words silenced the entire table. "This gesture is from the owner of the Royal Bistro," he said, placing the envelope in front of Cynthia. "He has been watching. We want to hear about your experience tonight and address the issue directly," the manager said. Cynthia's smile faltered, her eyes widening in surprise at the mention of the owner. "The owner?" she repeated, her voice tinged with disbelief. Before the manager could respond, the man in the gray suit approached their table. The room fell silent instantly, all eyes turning toward him. He stood there, poised and powerful, offering a polite smile. "Yes, the owner," he said, his voice calm but firm. "My name is David Miller, and this is my restaurant." Cynthia's jaw tightened, her cheeks flushing slightly. "Mr. Miller? I didn't recognize you," she said, her words trailing off as she clearly fumbled for an explanation. David gestured toward Sarah, who stood silently by the side, her gaze fixed on the floor. "She's my granddaughter," he said, his tone still composed. "She is one of the hardest workers I know, and I'm proud to have her on my team." The color drained from Cynthia's face, and her friends exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier laughter replaced by a tense silence. The air became thick with discomfort. David did not raise his voice. He remained composed, unwavering. "I couldn't help but overhear the way you spoke to her tonight," he continued, his tone even. "And while I understand that everyone makes mistakes, I believe there's a way to handle things with respect and kindness." Cynthia tried to find a response, but before she could speak, David leaned slightly forward, his calm demeanor unchanged. Money can buy luxury, but it cannot grant you the right to demean those who work to bring that luxury to life, he said, his words slicing through the silence like a knife. But his message wasn't just for Cynthia, it was for everyone in the room, and the weight of it hung in the air. The room was utterly still. Every diner stood frozen, hanging on David's every word. Cynthia, who just moments ago had exuded arrogance, now sat rigidly, her confidence shattered. Her fingers trembled around her wine glass, the calm facade she had built crumbling under the weight of the moment. David stood tall, his gaze sweeping across Cynthia's friends before landing on the other patrons in the room. "Respect is the foundation of this restaurant," he said, his voice resonating throughout the space. "It's not just respect for the food we serve, but for the people who make it possible, the chefs, the servers, the dishwashers. Each of them is an integral part of what you are enjoying tonight." Cynthia opened her mouth as if to protest, but no sound came out. Instead, one of her friends shifted awkwardly, breaking the tension in the room. "I'm sure Cynthia didn't mean to hurt anyone," the woman said weakly, her voice barely audible. David tilted his head slightly, his gaze fixed on her. "Perhaps not," David said, his voice calm but purposeful. "But intention cannot erase the impact that words have. Words have power, and when used carelessly, they can leave lasting wounds." He turned to Sarah, still standing quietly by the side, her face a blend of embarrassment and silent gratitude. "Sarah, tonight you showed professionalism and grace, even when unfairly scrutinized. I want you to know how proud I am of you," David said, his eyes soft as they met hers. Sarah blinked, fighting back tears, giving a slight nod, unable to believe the praise. She hadn't believed in her ability to speak out, but her gratitude was clear to all. David turned back to Cynthia, his calmness unchanged. "As for you," he said, his tone still polite but firm, "I could ask you to leave and never return, but I believe a better lesson is in order." Cynthia's eyes widened, clearly alarmed. Her friends exchanged worried glances. David pointed toward the bottle of champagne the manager had brought earlier. "This bottle was meant to be a gesture of goodwill," he explained. "But instead, I will donate its value, along with the full cost of your bill, to a local charity supporting young women like Sarah, those who are working hard to build a better future for themselves." Whispers rippled through the restaurant, some patrons nodding in agreement, while others exchanged surprised looks. Finally, Cynthia found her voice, but it was weak and trembling. "Mr. Miller, I think this is a bit much. I didn't mean to." David raised his hand, gently but firmly silencing her. "This is not a punishment, Mrs. Jacobs," he said, his voice calm but heavy with resolve. "It's about responsibility, and I hope this moment gives you the opportunity to reflect on the kind of legacy you wish to leave behind." His words were not shouted, but their weight was undeniable, causing Cynthia to lower her gaze to her hands, unable to meet his eyes. Her friends sat motionless, clearly unsure of how to react. David stepped back, addressing the entire room. "Let tonight be a reminder to all of us," he said, his voice echoing throughout the space. "Kindness costs nothing, but it can carry immense meaning. You never know what someone else is carrying, or who might be watching." The room erupted in soft, genuine applause. It was not loud or dramatic, but it was sincere. Diners nodded in approval, a few offering quiet smiles to Sarah as if silently showing their support for her. Cynthia sat there, completely immobilized, unable to move. The confidence she had once projected was gone, and she sat silently, unaccustomed to being challenged, especially in front of an audience. The sensation disoriented her, her face paling, her hands clutching the edge of her chair. David turned back to Sarah. "Take a moment to rest," he said gently. "You deserve it." Sarah hesitated, then nodded softly, quietly walking to the back of the restaurant, disappearing from view. The kitchen door opened, and Sarah's posture seemed slightly straighter, her steps lighter, but the lesson had not yet concluded. The ripples from this moment would spread far beyond the walls of the Royal Bistro. That night, the atmosphere at the Royal Bistro slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but something had changed. Diners whispered among themselves, not about the food or the decor, but about what they had just witnessed. The man in the gray suit had reminded them of something profound. Dignity and respect are not just virtues, but essentials. Cynthia sat silently at the table, an unusual stillness about her. Her friends exchanged awkward glances, unsure of how to proceed. They avoided mentioning the moment directly, but the discomfort was palpable on their faces. Cynthia stared at her untouched plate, the shame heavier than any food she could have ordered. In the back of the restaurant, Sarah leaned against the kitchen wall, taking deep breaths to regain her composure. The manager approached her, offering a warm smile. "You handled yourself very well tonight," he said. Not everyone could remain so composed. Sarah nodded faintly, her voice soft but steady. "Thank you. I didn't think anyone was paying attention." "Oh, they were," the manager confirmed. "Especially Mr. Miller." In the dining area, David Miller returned to his seat, calmly sipping a glass of water as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. A few patrons passed by his table, nodding or quietly whispering thanks. An elderly man paused for a moment. "Not often you see someone stand up like that," he said. "That was something special." David smiled faintly. "It's not about standing up," he said. "It's about reminding everyone, myself included, that kindness is the least we can offer each other." As Cynthia and her friends prepared to leave, she avoided looking at anyone, her cheeks still flushed. The confident strides she once had were now replaced with hesitant steps. At the door, she paused and glanced back at the room she once dominated. For the first time, she appeared smaller, quieter, her once unshakable confidence now shattered. The staff and patrons didn't look at her with pity or disdain. Instead, there was a shared understanding, a collective hope that perhaps, just perhaps, she would walk out of this moment changed. Outside, the evening air was cool. Cynthia stopped on the sidewalk. Her friends tried to console her, but their empty words fell flat. She waved them off, asking for a moment to herself. Meanwhile, inside the Royal Bistro, Sarah returned to the dining area with newfound confidence. She moved between the tables, offering warm smiles to the customers who now saw her not just as a waitress, but as a strong and dignified woman. The night ended quietly, but the lesson lingered long after the doors closed. Some customers left larger tips than usual, others exchanged kind words with the staff they had previously overlooked. And Cynthia, she walked away in humility. Her world had changed in a way she never could have imagined. David watched from the window as the last of the customers left. He didn't smile, nor did he look smug. He simply sat there, content that one important point had been made clear. Because in the end, what mattered wasn't wealth, status, or power, but how you treated the people you encountered along your path, no matter who they were or where they came from. And perhaps, if we all remembered that, the world would be just a little bit kinder. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who might need a reminder of the power of kindness. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire reflection and change. This story reminds us of the power of patience and respect, even when faced with difficult challenges. Have you ever stood up for someone else in an unfair situation? How would you handle being wrongly judged? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your words might inspire others and create positive change in the community. If this story made you think, share it with your friends and family to spread the message of respect and compassion. Thank you for following and supporting. Together, we can create a fairer world, even with small but meaningful actions. Wishing you endless energy and happiness. Thank you for supporting the channel. Please like, share, and subscribe to receive the latest updates. The stories are collected from various sources and do not represent any individual or organization. They are shared with the intention of spreading human values in life and have been rewritten with the support of AI. If there are any mistakes, kindly overlook them with understanding.